Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to a discussion on the budget and economic review. Now, the two most important economic documents that are presented by the government every year are number one, the budget, and number two, the economic survey. Now, what is this budget and what is this economic survey? Now, the general conceptualization of the economic survey is that economic survey tells you about the recent economic events of the last 1 year. Of all the economic and non-economic events that have happened in the last 1 year, what are the challenges they have posed to the economy and to the government over the last 1 year, and how the government has responded to those challenges. So, as a sum in substance, economic survey is telling you about the economic history of the last 1 year. So, it is telling you about the past, whereas the budget is telling you about the future. So, budget tells you about the estimated receipt and expenditure. Now, from pure accounting sense, this is just an estimated receipt and expenditure. But how the government collects this receipt and where the government spend those money tells you about the priorities of the government. So, economic survey telling you about the past, budget telling you about the future. If you combine both of these things, you will get a holistic picture of the Indian economy, a comprehensive picture of the Indian economy. But these two documents, budget and economic survey presented a day before a budget is presented in the parliament and budget is presented on 1st of February. These two documents in such way are presented only during a normal usual year. But this year, the year of 2024 was not a usual year. This was unusual year. Unusual year in the sense that this is an election year. And during the election year, neither the complete budget and nor the economic survey is presented. So instead of a complete budget, this year we had an interim budget, a budget for few months of a year till the new government takes power. And instead of the economic survey, what the Department of Economic Affairs or the Ministry of Finance has done, they have brought a document titled Indian Economy, a Review. So how we are going to plan this discussion? So let me tell you, there will be two-part discussion. So this is a series which will be today and then later on done tomorrow. So today what I'll do, I'll discuss this document, the document Indian Economy, a Review, which is just similar to the economic survey. So we'll look into the past, and the past since 1950s, what has been happening to the Indian economy since 1950s, and then especially the decade of 2014 to 2024. And for understandable reason, this document has majorly focused on this decade of 2014 to 2024. And later on, we'll combine our discussion on this background of the Indian economy with a discussion on budget tomorrow. So tomorrow, we'll be looking into the hard numbers of the budget, the macroeconomic indicators, their trends over the last many years. Because if you see, these trends which are presented in such kind of documents and in the budget are very important for the UPSC exam. So this year only, in the last 1 year, in the 2023 year prelims examination, 8 questions were directly asked from the budget and economic survey. So if someone says you that there was not much firework in this budget, there was no major announcement in the budget, so you should take those kind of declaration with a pinch of salt, because we are not just looking as a UPSC aspirant, we are not just looking on the only about the firework or the budget. We are looking into the hard numbers, and those hard numbers we have to dig in. So that we'll do tomorrow. Today we'll set the background, and tomorrow we'll complement this background with some of the numbers, some of the budgetary indicators, provision, from where the money is coming, where the money is going, what are the deficit indicators, what are their trends. All of those discussion we'll do tomorrow. So let's start our discussion on the economic review today. So let's start our discussion. So these are the broad contents, these are the broad contours of a discussion. This document which I was just alluding to is presented in the form of 2 chapters. So 2 broad chapters are there arranged on the base on 75 around pages. So the first chapter, which deals with the past, present and the future of the Indian economy, which deals mainly with the story of the Indian economy from 1950s till 2024. And the broad categorization is from 1950s to 2014 and then 2014 to 2024. This decade of 2014 to 2024, they say, is a decade of transformative growth. And then we'll look into the drivers of the transformative growth in this decade, particularly in 2014 to 2024. Later on, we'll look into the challenges to growth. So what are the challenges of growth, challenges to growth that the government is saying are there, which can be posed to the Indian economy in the coming years, in the coming decade. Then we'll look into the second chapter. In the second chapter, the broad thing that we will be looking into are the resilience of the Indian economy. That is, what are the factors which have led Indian economy to become resilient despite all the challenges it has faced in the last decade, especially challenges arising from the COVID pandemic. So despite COVID pandemic, Indian economy has performed well as compared to its peer and also as compared to the developed countries. So we look into those factors which have given these resilience to the Indian economy. So let's start our discussion. Let's first look into the first chapter or the first theme of this document, past, present and the future of the Indian economy. Now let's look into the first topic, that is Indian growth story, how it has been discussed in this document. Now this document discusses Indian growth story right from 1950s. So you know, we became independent in 1947 and from 1950s our economic journey started. And when our economic journey started, initially we focused in the initial plan years on agriculture. But later on we shifted our gears, we went to industry, we went for heavy industrialization on the basis of Nehru-Mahalanobis plan. So very severe agriculture crisis was there, a low manufacturing base was there, and we wanted to tackle it on the basis of heavy industrialization. But in 1960s, initial years of the 1960s, we met with some challenges, and these challenges were coming from our neighbors. So we had in the 1962 Sino-Indian War, and then in the 1965 Indo-Pak War. Now you know, whenever there is a war, most of the resources, or rather all the resources, are usually devoted to war-related causes or war-related preparation. So what happened? Most of the resources went to war-related preparation, and we had years of scarcity. So crisis was there, we had years of scarcity, we had inflation, and at the same time, food crisis was brewing. So in 1965, we had food crisis. We had a situation of almost famine. The last famine which took place in India was in 1943, the Great Bengal Famine. And after that, in 1965. So what government did? Government went for Green Revolution. And Green Revolution, you know, is application of technology in the agriculture, and through that government tried to increase agriculture production and agriculture productivity. Came 1970s. In the 1970s, again we had challenge from a neighbor. Indo-Pak War in 1971, which is also called as Bangladesh Liberation War. Then in 1975 emergency, then Janata Party government came in. So these years from 1950s till 1980s were the years of turbulence. We were just managing our economy and are also being faced challenges from our neighbors. And therefore, these years had very low and muted growth. So the economic growth in these years from 1950s to 1980 was very low. On an average, India grew by just 3.5%. Now, this was also responsible for the later on growth years, because if at a very low base, we started picking pace from 1980s onwards. So from 1980s to 1990s, which was a year of fresh lease of air. So we had reforms here. Some people say that these were the reforms which are called pro-business reform, unlike the pro-market reforms which we saw in 1991. So 1980s to 1990s had a very high growth rate as compared to 1950s to 80s. So from 1950s to 1980, just 3.5% average growth rate, and 1980s to 1990s, we had a 5% plus growth rate. 1990s onward, till 2010, we had a 6% plus growth rate. But this 1990s decade was a special decade, because 1991, we had major reform, a watershed reform, a reform which goes by the name of LPG, liberalization, privatization, globalization, under the broader rubric of new economic policy. So we had a new economic policy, we had a new industrial policy, in which now government agreed that we will take a backstage and will also involve the private sector. So government in this new economic policy was nowhere saying that we will not be doing our responsibility, will not be doing our fair share in the economy, but what they were saying that private sector will also be included. Because in the initial decades from 1950s to 1980s, what we were having, were having very state controlled economy. So state was controlling the commanding heights of the economy. We had a license permit quota system. It was very difficult for private businesses to do business. But in 1991, when we reformed, we said that yes, private sector will also be an equal partner in the economic development of the country. Came 2010, we were already facing the global financial crisis, and by 2014, our economy was in a very bad shape because we had a huge twin deficit. Current account deficit plus fiscal deficit was very high. At the same time, banking sector was under severe strain. NPAs were very high. And then the government changed. And this document says that since then, 2014 to 2024 is the decade of transformative growth. Now, what we have seen that initially we went for agriculture in the 1950s. Then within 1950s only, we changed our gears to industry. Then we met with many challenges. Then in 1991, we started moving towards LPG, liberalization, privatization, globalization, where service sector became the major driver of the Indian economy. Now, whether in agriculture in the mid-1960s or in the industries in the mid-1950s, or when we went for the service sector in the 1990s decade, all of these reforms were technology enabled. So green revolution was tech enabled, the heavy industrialization was tech enabled, and the service sector was also tech enabled. So in all of this process, from 1950s till 2024 or till 2014, what we have seen that technology has a major role to play. Also, we have seen that initially we were a very closed economy. We were a very statist economy. Later on in 1991, we reformed. We became privatized. We became open and global economy. So what are the key insights from this story we can get? We can get the first insight is that we moved from a closed economy to the open economy. Second insight we get is that from state-led public investment, we went to the coexistence of the public and the private investment. So not only state now is responsible for the economic development or for taking the trajectory of the economic development, but even the private sector has a fair share to play. Then the third insight we get is that technology has always been a key driver of the Indian economic growth from 1950s till 2024. So let's see what are the drivers of this transformative decade, that is transformative growth decade from 2014 to 2024, that the government is saying that this decade has been a transformative growth decade. Now this document in a very detailed manner presents that this decade has been a special decade because an overall comprehensive growth has taken place in this particular years. Now the first thing that they mention is that financial system improvement. They said that the drivers of this decade or the economic growth in this decade, the first one is the financial system improvement, whether it's the banking sector or whether it's the insolvency resolution. So we had measure for insolvency resolution earlier also, but a broad approach like IBC, Insolvency Bankruptcy Code, came in 2015 only under this government. The second one is fast tracking infrastructure project across the spectrum. So infrastructure projects were becoming a major drivers of the growth in this particular decade. And when we say infrastructure, we generally have the conceptualization of infrastructure only by the physical infrastructure. But infrastructure is a very broad term. Infrastructure can be social, like health and education, economic, which usually is associated with the physical infrastructure, and then digital infrastructure, which is now becoming very important under this government. Digital infrastructure. So economic infrastructure, which is physical infrastructure, we can say can be divided on the various types, like roads. So investment in roads increased under Bharatmala program, like railways, like National Railway Plan, or including private sector in overall railway development, except the railway operation, or like ports, like seaport, the Sagarmala program, or like airports, like Udan scheme. So in 2016, we had National Civil Aviation Policy, and within that National Civil Aviation Policy, we had one of the provision of regional connectivity. And to just justify that regional connectivity angle, we brought in Udan scheme, so as to have a affordable aviation services to the people. Then within the digital infrastructure, we know government is investing a lot in the recent decade or in the recent year also, like UPI, like Digital India Mission, or making credit very accessible to the people through digital tools, through like tools like Open Credit Enablement Network. So all of these investment government is doing within the digital infrastructure space or in digital public goods. And of course, social infrastructure, government is investing heavily, and we'll see this particular point later on in our slides also. Now, the third one was increasing use of technology and digital tools. And that we have seen were responsible for the transformative growth, not only in this particular decade, but also in the initial decade that I have already told you. The second last one is enhancing ease of living and ease of doing business. Now, if you refer to the last economic survey, in that economic survey, government said that there are some factors which are important for increasing the ease of living and ease of doing business. And if we take account of these factors, then we can increase the productive potential of the economy. Now, what were those factors? Government says the first one is agriculture productivity. The second one is trust-based governance, that you have to trust the people, you have to trust the citizens. The third one was investing in the public goods, goods like infrastructure good. And they say that if you do all of these things, if you take into account all of these factors, then you will be able to enhance the ease of living and ease of doing business by increasing the efficiency or productive potential of the economy and in general people also. Then the last one is the inclusive growth policy measure. Now, this is also one of the most important factors that has driven the Indian economic growth in the last 10 years as per this document. So whether it is of financial inclusion like Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, or of providing accessible clean fuel through Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, or of providing sanitation facilities through Swachh Bharat Mission, or of providing accessible healthcare through Ayushman Bharat. So for example, if you see, initially in the 2014, the out-of-pocket expenditure on healthcare expenditure was 62%. After the implementation of Ayushman Bharat, by 2022, it was just 47%. So this is how the government is making health services very accessible for the people. So these were the factors which are responsible or were the drivers of the transformative growth of the last decade as per this document. Now, this document also notes the 4 challenges which are for the economy, or which the economy can face in the coming years or the coming decade. Now, what are these 4 challenges? The first challenge is of global spillovers. Now, we have seen that since 1991, we are a liberalized, globalized economy. Since we are a liberalized and we are a globalized economy, definitely we will be influenced by the challenges or by the events which are happening outside the country. So, for example, if there is a war like Russia-Ukraine war or Israel and Palestine war, definitely we will have to face the challenges. We will be, or we can be, at the receiving end from these challenges. So one is the global spillover. So global events can pose challenges to the Indian economic growth. So for example, whenever there are disturbances in the Middle East, and as we are importing oil or fuel from the Middle East, always we have to give more dollars to import those fuels, because whenever there are disturbances, the prices of fuels, prices of crude oil increases. So this is one of the example how the global spillovers can negatively affect the performance of the Indian economy. Second one is energy transition challenge. And the root cause of this energy transition challenge is climate change. So for example, we know day by day climate is changing. Now, if someone says that climate change is bad, then definitely that person is wrong. Climate change per se is not bad, but the pace and the pattern with which the climate change is happening, the intensity with which climate is changing, that is something which is something worrisome. So if climate is changing, and we know the root cause of the change of the climate is the burning of fossil fuel or the release of carbon emission in the atmosphere, so definitely we have to contain those carbon emission. Now, how can we contain those carbon emission? We can contain those carbon emission by transitioning from our present energy sources to new energy sources, or from our renewable energy sources to non-renewable energy sources to renewable energy sources. So for example, like from coal to wind or solar energy. Now, but if we transition from coal to wind or solar energy, then definitely there are people involved in these sectors like coal sector, and also there's a cost to growth. So those kind of challenges are the energy transition challenge. So energy transition challenge has its root cause in the climate change. Climate change has its root cause in the carbon emission. If we have to contain the carbon emission, we have to change our portfolio of, or our energy mix. And if we change our energy mix, definitely we will have challenges in terms of cost and challenges in terms of loss of livelihood of those people who are presently included or involved in the non-renewable sector. Now, the third challenge is arising from artificial intelligence. Now, artificial intelligence is now becoming very common word. Artificial intelligence like giving cognitive ability to think and learn to machines. Now, we know that presently in India, more than 50% of our GDP is contributed by services sector. And largely, these services sectors are services exports. And largely, they are tech enabled. So, they are driven by technology. Now, if some artificial intelligence tool can be developed which can somehow bypass or replace these people who are, with the help of the technology, are exporting services from India, then definitely it can act as a challenge to the Indian economy, because more than 50% of our GDP will be in danger. Now, similar thing is being mentioned by the IMF. And IMF in its working paper, and the working paper that has been mentioned in this particular document only, the Indian Economy a Review, which is presented by Department of Economic Affairs, it says that more than 50% of the global economic employment is at risk because of the challenges arising from transition challenge. So, artificial intelligence is something which is posing a great challenge to the Indian economy in the coming years and the coming decade. And the last one is a skills challenge. Now, we can say that we are the most populous country of the world, but we are just the most populous country of the world. We cannot say that we have the most able human resources. We can only say that we have the most able human resources when we have these people skilled. So today they are just human. If we have to convert them into resources, if we have to properly channelize their abilities, then we have to skill them. And government is also trying its best efforts through various programs like Skill India Mission, National Policy on Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, having a complete dedicated ministry on skill development to tackle this challenge. So 4 challenges are mentioned here. Global spillover, which can pose danger to our economic growth and economic development in the coming decade. Energy transition challenge, challenges arising from artificial intelligence, and then skills challenge. So these are the challenges which are noted. If you see this kind of discussion, whatever we are doing here, and if you look into the present budget which was presented yesterday, then you'll see there is a great amount of convergence in the themes which are discussed in the budget or presented by the finance minister in the budget and with respect to this particular document. So there's a great kind of convergence that is going on between both of them. Now, after challenges, now let's look into the next chapter which has been presented in this economic document only. And this chapter discusses the resilience of the Indian economy, that how Indian economy was able to tackle these challenges in the last 1 decade, despite all the things which are happening negatively like COVID pandemic. And they say the major factor which is responsible for ensuring or assuring the resilience of the Indian economy was the performance of the domestic economy. And they say for the performance or the good performance of the domestic economy, some of the reasons were a strong post-COVID recovery. That soon after COVID, we were able to have a V-shaped recovery. So soon after COVID, like the year of 2021-22, 2022-23, and even this year 2023 to 2024, they say we will witness 7% plus growth rate. So this growth rate is impressive given the situations we were in during the COVID time. So a strong post-COVID recovery is something which is responsible or an important factor for ensuring the domestic resilience of the Indian economy. Second one, they say the resilient consumption. So if you look at the 4 drivers or 4 major engines of the growth of the Indian economy or any other economy, these are consumption, C, investment, which we also say gross capital formation, government expenditure, G, plus net exports. Now, As per the current data, more than 50% out of these four, more than 50% of a GDP is contributed by consumption. So consumption is very important factor in ensuring the resilience of the Indian economy. That is what has been argued in this document, and that is what is the general knowledge also. Now, why this consumption is an important factor and from where the consumption is coming? The document notes that because of a consequent per capita income increase, because our per capita income is continuously increasing, that's why the consumption is also increasing, and consumption is taking care of any of the muted performance of these three growth engine. So in the last 9 years, in the last budget, government said that in the last 9 years, our per capita income has almost doubled. So because of the higher per capita income, people are consuming more, and because people are consuming more, growth is being ensured. So we are having a resilient performance despite all the challenges across the world and even in the Indian economy. Then the next one they are saying is an investment-led recovery. That is, government is focusing more on capital expenditure, and because of this capital expenditure increase, we are able to ensure a sustainable growth for Indian economy. So you can see this chart number 5, which has been extracted from this document only. It talks about the capital expenditure by the public sector. Public sector means by the central government and also by the central public sector enterprises. Now, from financial year 15 till financial year 2024, budgetary estimates are presented. And the blue one tells you about the capital expenditure of the central government. You will see that this is rising, and over the years it has risen from 2% of GDP, from 2% of GDP to from 2 lakh crore to 10 lakh crore. So almost 5 times it has risen. And this year's budget, this year's interim budget, has raised this further to 11.11 lakh crore. So continuous rise in the capital expenditure has ensured that our growth remains stable and sustainable. Now, one more chart which I wanted to present you, which is not very much related to this particular discussion, means this particular point, is this one, chart number 3 from this particular document only. And it tells you about the trends in investment rate over the years. It shows how the investment rate have behaved from financial year 5 to financial year 2024. It says that there are 3 clear distinct trends that we can witness. The number 1 trend is financial year 5 to financial year 12. The second trend-based division is from financial year 13 to 20, and then 21 to 2024. It says that the first division, or in the first category, we have unsustainable credit boom. And this was a time period when we had a very high growth rate of almost 8% or 9%, and sometimes even clocking double digit. So during this time period, they said that we had a very unsustainable credit boom, and because of this unsustainable credit boom by the banking sector, later on we had a huge NPA, and then we had a huge drop in the investment in the later years. Later on, government took some steps to improve the banking sector performance and also bringing down the NPAs, and then we started having an increase in the investment. So this is a particularly important for the prelims exam. You can have question from this particular chart in your prelims exam based on some trends. Now, let's look into the third point. The third point is reforms in agriculture. Now, if you see this government from the 2014 to 2024, and why I am taking up this particular time period 2014 to 2024, because Finance Ministry has presented this document and has meticulously involved itself during this time period only. So that's why I am again saying 2014 to 2024. So during this time period, there were many reforms that were taken in agriculture, both in the pre-harvest, that is from the input side, and also from the output side. In the input side, like for providing affordable quality seeds, for providing assured irrigation, like through schemes like Pradhan Mantri Kisi Sinchai Yojana, or making Kisan credit card for agriculture finance more accessible to people, and also taking some of the income support scheme for farmers like through Pradhan Mantri Kisan Samman Nidhi, and also in the post-harvest segment like PM Kisan Sampada Yojana for food processing, or agriculture infrastructure fund for post-harvest management facilities. Now, all of these steps were taken by the government, Apart from this, government also took steps in the agriculture sector within the realm of the marketing. So APMC laws, government tried to amend them. Government tried to bring some of the progressive measure in the APMC laws. Government tried to take the help of technology and brought this particular intervention called E-NAM, E-National Agriculture Market. And time and again news are coming now that this particular reform of the government, E-NAM, is now bearing fruits. So the next factor which aided in the resilience of the domestic economy was the reforms in agriculture. Then reforms in industry. We know industry is a major problem in India because most of the people in India are involved in the agriculture sector, but agriculture sector is just giving us 20% of our total output, and very few people are involved in service sector, and service sector is giving us more than 50% of the total economic value of our output. But industry is something which is stuck. For the last 3 decades, government is trying its best to increase the share of industry in the total output of the economy. Whereas from the last 3 decades, we are still stuck in just around 30% of GDP, which is coming from industry. And within the industry, if you see manufacturing, if you look at every other policy document of the government in the last 3 decades, they have aimed to increase the share of manufacturing GDP from 17% to 25%. But still, we are nowhere near to 25%. So government has taken many measures, particularly in the recent year, whether you say production linked incentive or Make in India, and within Make in India, Made for India, or whether you say steps for increasing the manufacturing by supporting MSME, by revising the definition of MSME, by giving concessional loans to MSME, by ensuring guarantees for loans to MSME through credit guarantee trust from micro small enterprises, or by having Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana. All of these steps have been mentioned in this particular document that government has taken to reform the industrial landscape of the country. So we'll see that how the industry has performed. These steps are still taken, are very at nascent stage. So they have not been able to perform effectively till now. But this document has noted that these particular steps are also aiding in the resilience of the Indian economy. Then healthier banking sector. Again, if you see, the banking sector was under severe strain say before 2014. Soon after the crisis hit, global financial crisis hit, banking sector was bleeding, literally bleeding, because most of the infrastructure investment which went from the banking sector, most of the credit which went from the banking sector for various infrastructure projects was on the assumption that the economy will be growing, continuously growing. But as the crisis hit, all of these projects became dead. All of these investment or the assets of the bank became NPA. So from that low bottom, we had to repair the banking sector. At that time, we were facing something called twin balance sheet challenge. That is, both the balance sheet of the corporates and the banking sector were under severe strain. So from that bottom, government started reforming the banking sector, and later on, banking sector reform also started giving result. As of now, both the credit offtake, which is more than 15%, and the gross net performing asset, both are performing well. So credit offtake is more than 15%, and GNPA, gross non-performing asset, has declined to a very low level. And you can see how this performance has been in this particular chart. So this particular chart number 13 from this document itself, tells you about declining gross NPA, declining gross non-performing asset from scheduled commercial bank. And as a percentage of gross advances, you can see that during the time of 2017, 18, 19, it was a very high. And during financial year 18, it was almost 11.2%. So out of total advances, more than 10% were becoming NPA. But later on, because of the efforts by the government, efforts like IBC, efforts like reforming and consolidating the banking sector, these NPA started decreasing. And on the last figure, September 2023, it was just 3.2%. So banking sector is also in a healthier position right now. And this is also aiding to the resilience of the Indian economy and has aided in the resilience of the Indian economy even during COVID time period. The last one is digital infrastructure. And we have discussed that how Digital India Mission, how digital public infrastructure investment, how your OCEN, how your trade receivable discounting system to reform the working capital issues of the MSME by using the digital tools, how all of these, along with digital intervention in the payment sector like UPI or digital intervention through Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, DBT, Jam Trinity, all of them, how they have aided in the resilience of the Indian economy. So domestic economy has been particularly resilient because of all these factors, because of the good performance of all these: strong post-COVID recovery, resilient consumption, investment where the government is particularly focused on, continuous reforms in agriculture, government deep desire to reform industry, healthier banking sector, and the strong performance of the government, especially in building up digital infrastructure. Now, let's look into the next point, and that is the point of macroeconomic stability. Again, we are macroeconomically stable, and that's why it is also aiding to the resilience of the Indian economy. That is something which has been argued in this particular document. And they say one of the macroeconomic stability is coming from the deft management strategy or inflation management strategy of the Reserve Bank of India. Reserve Bank of India, which is primarily responsible for managing inflation in India, was able to contain successfully inflation in India, not even the general inflation, which is measured through CPI, but also food inflation. And Reserve Bank of India, along with the government, both of them managed inflation effectively. So during even COVID time period, we had just around 8% of the inflation. And if you see, between 2009 to 2014, document notes, the average inflation rate was 10%. General inflation rate, retail inflation rate was 10%. And for food inflation, it was much higher. But government and the RBI, both of them, managed the inflation effectively during COVID time period. And this has much to do with the kind of agreement they both had in 2015 and 2016, like of flexible inflation targeting. So government signed an agreement called Monetary Policy Framework Agreement in 2015 with the government and with the RBI, and under this a monetary policy committee was set up, and this monetary policy committee MPC was given the mandate of controlling inflation in the country. And because of the effective performance of this monetary policy committee, or because of the effective performance of both the government and the RBI through MPFA, we were able to manage inflation effectively in our country despite all the challenges. If we compare our management strategy as compared to the developed countries, then you can see that in the developed countries, especially in the US, the inflation was at 4-decade high. But in our country, as compared to historical highs, we were nowhere near to it. We had very effectively managed the inflation, and that is aiding to the macroeconomic stability and later on aiding to the resilience of the Indian economy. That is something which has been argued in this particular document. Now, another factor which they say is responsible for macroeconomic stability of the country is that of external sector stability. Now, because we are a globalized country, because we are dealing with the other world partners also, and that's why we have to be very conscious of how we are dealing with them and how to assess the external sector stability of the country or the external sector even vulnerability of the country. We can assess that on the basis of the balance of payment position, BOP position. So we can look into the current account, how our current account is performing, how our capital account is performing, how much foreign exchange reserves we have, whether we have enough foreign exchange reserve to meet our imports, whether we have enough foreign exchange reserve to meet our debt, external debt, whether we have higher short-term debt or lower short-term debt. All of these factors tell us something about the external sector stability or external sector vulnerability of that particular country, and in this case, India. So for example, if you look at this particular chart, chart number 18 from this document itself, it tells you about India's external debt position and vulnerability indicators. And it tells you that in most of these indicators, we have improved. So for example, overall external debt to GDP ratio, if you see this external debt to GDP ratio, so you will see that external debt to GDP ratio has reduced from 2013 to 2023. So how much debt you have taken in the foreign exchange as compared to your GDP, total value of the production in your economy, that has been reducing. That is a good sign. That is a healthier sign. Then foreign exchange reserves to external debt, whether you have enough foreign exchange to pay your debt or not, that also you can see that that is increasing, and that is a healthier sign. Means you have a more foreign exchange, your foreign exchange reserve in total is increasing as compared to your external debt. That is also something a healthier sign, and that is also improving. Then whether you have a more short-term debt or less of short-term debt. So if you compare your short-term debt to your total debt, so if someone asks you whether you want to give your money back tomorrow or after 1 year, definitely you will say it will be more comfortable for you to pay your money back next year. So short-term debt liabilities are always much more unstable as compared to long-term debt liabilities. So just like we reduce our short-term liabilities, see, even countries reduce their short-term liabilities. So if you have a less of short-term debt, that is a healthier sign. So if you see that short-term debt as compared to total debt, short-term external debt, ED means external debt, as compared to total external debt is also reducing. Now, these trends are important particularly for prelims examination. That's why I'm showing you these trends from these particular documents. So do make a note of these trends. So if you see, external sector is also in a very healthy position, and therefore macroeconomic stability of a country or the resilience of the country is ensured. Now, let's look into the next one, that is a human welfare front. If you see the government performance in the last 10 years from 2014 to 2024, then it is increasingly spending more and more money for the welfare provision. Now, under this document, this kind of approach of the government is called new welfare approach, and also a big tent approach. Big tent approach. That is approach that is taking into consideration of all the groups, all the social and the economic groups, and all their basic necessities. And that is being identified as from an umbrella term called big tent approach or a new welfare approach. If you see the points here, then you can see that continuously government expenditure on social sector is increasing. So increasing social sector expenditure is ensuring that welfare provisions are being provided to the vulnerable or marginalized sections of the society. In fact, in the last budget, more than 25% of the total expenditure of the government was the expenditure towards social sector. Then universalization of basic amenities. Now, if you look at all the, or if you conceptualize all the basic amenities, whether it's health, sanitation, education, credit, all of them has been ensured by the government through one or other scheme. So, for example, you can see here. So, whether it's a housing, or whether it's provision of electricity connection, or whether it's sanitation and drinking water, or whether it's skill development, or whether it's clean cooking fuel through schemes like Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, or whether it's livelihood security through schemes like MG Narega, for which the allocation increased during the COVID years. Later on, it was brought down, and for understandable reasons. And then whether it's for social security, for example, at a very low premium rate in 2015, government brought 3 schemes for social security. Schemes like Atal Pension Yojana for pension for the people who are in the unorganized sector. Schemes like Pradhan Mantri Jeevan Jyoti Bima Yojana for life insurance, or schemes like Pradhan Mantri Suraksha Bima Yojana for accidental insurance cover. All of these were brought at a very low minimal premium, so that people who are in the unorganized sector, people who are marginalized and vulnerable section, can also get access to these life insurance or accidental insurance or pension insurance schemes. Now, or whether it's for having better schools and better teacher, or whether it's for all weather roads, or whether it's for affordable healthcare, all of these things government is taking care of through various kind of schemes which are mentioned here. So this is the approach of the government, which is designated in this particular document as a new welfare approach or a big tent approach. That is, for all the people, for all the vulnerable sections of the society, there is something, some kind of step that the government is continuously taking. Now, again, affordable social security scheme that we have seen, then strategy, infrastructure across the spectrum, across this space, whether it's economic, social, digital, that we have already seen. And apart from this, the most important factor, which recently is becoming very important, especially in the lexicon of this government, is a woman-led development. And sometimes people in the government saying a Nari Shakti strategy, that is empowering women. And government is empowering women through various kind of measures, whether it's measures like Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, or whether it's measures like Sukanya Samriddhi, so as to give access to finance to the girls, or whether it's protecting girl child, or whether it's women reservation bill, women reservation, or whether it's linking women to entrepreneurship. So, for example, like Deen Dayal Antyodaya Yojana, National Rural Livelihood Mission, that has been particularly mentioned in this document. That is a self-help group strategy promoting women-led self-help group, or providing women entrepreneurship opportunity through women entrepreneurship platform, which is a platform of Niti Aayog, or providing them loans through PM Mudra scheme, or Startup India, Stand Up India. All of these measures government is taking to empower women. And these measures are allowing women to become more and more empowered and to participate more and more in the labor force. And because of these measures, back-to-back measures, and because of the priority that the government is putting on women, the labor force participation rate of the women has increased over the years, especially from 2017-18. So if women is more secured, more empowered, more financially independent, more linked to businesses, entrepreneurship, definitely they will participate more in the economy. They will be participating more in the labor force. And this increase in the labor force participation rate over the years from 2017-18 to 2022-23 is no surprise, therefore. So if you see the labor force participation rate of the women, that is female labor force participation rate, which was just 23.3% in 2017-18, when the first round of periodic labor force survey was conducted, it increased to 37% by 2022 to 2023. In general also, labor force participation rate, both of male and female, both has increased over the years. But remarkable is this achievement, which was of women-led development, which is of female labor force participation rate, which has increased from 23% on 23% to 37%. So this is a new welfare approach, and in this new welfare approach, these are the broad pillars of increasing social sector expenditure, also ensuring the efficiency of social sector expenditure through schemes like Jan Dhan Aadhaar Mobile, direct benefit transfer, universalization of basic amenities, all the basic amenities under big tent approach, affordable social security scheme. We have seen how three most important social security schemes like Atal Pension Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Jeevan Jyoti Bima Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Suraksha Bima Yojana. Infrastructure push strategy across the spectrum, all kind of infrastructure are being given emphasis on women-led development. So all of them are increasing the welfare of the people, welfare of the economy, and therefore ensuring the resilience of the Indian economy. Now the last important and the critical pillar, which is often relegated to last but is also one of the most important pillar, is climate resilience. Now, just now we discussed that the climate change is an important and real phenomenon that is happening in front of us. So definitely our economy must also be immune or in some way ready to face challenges from climatic shocks. So what are the kind of steps government has taken to immune or to make our economy resilient from the climatic shocks? Now the document notes that at three levels the steps have been taken: at the multilateral level, at domestic level, and then steps for increasing the sustainable finances or green finances. So for example, at the multilateral level, they say Paris Agreement, which government was party with, and government submitted its nationally determined contribution under Paris Agreement so as to reduce its emission intensity of GDP, absorbing more and more carbon dioxide, and to increase the renewable energy capacity of the country. Later on, government revised these targets to a much more higher level and also said that yes, by 2070 we will reach net zero. And then later on, government also presented something called LT-LEDS strategy. And this LT-LEDS strategy, which is long-term low emission development strategy, was presented by the government in the COP27 Sharm el-Sheikh. So Conference of Party under UNFCCC was there in the Sharm el-Sheikh, and their government presented a strategy, of course, that yes, we will do these things, we'll reduce our carbon intensity, will absorb more and more carbon, We'll go for more and more afforestation. We'll increase our renewable energy capacity. But how we'll do that? How we'll go forward in these steps? By investing more on renewables, by investing more on bioethanol, by properly utilizing our natural resources. So all of this strategy was presented in this particular long-term low emission development strategy document, which was presented by the government. Then at domestic level, also government is taking many steps. Now Paris Agreement was signed in 2015, but at domestic level only, we had a much more detailed framework to tackle the climate change in the form of National Action Plan on Climate Change, which started in 2007 only. Some around 8 missions are there for water, for solar, and many other such kind of missions are there to tackle all the effects of the climate change. Then solarization is something which the government is promoting both within the domestic economy and also at the international front through steps like International Solar Alliance. Then what are the steps government is taking to ensure the sustainability of the finances or finances which are going for green sectors? So these steps are mainly coming from two fronts, through Security Exchange Board of India and through RBI. Now Security Exchange Board of India has released a framework for green debt securities. Green debt securities. Then Security Exchange Board of India has also made it mandatory for the top 1,000 companies, that is top 1,000 companies by market capitalization, by market value, to submit business responsibility and sustainability report, that whether their businesses are done in a sustainable manner or not, and what kind of impacts they have on the environment. So this kind of report they have to submit every year to Security Exchange Board of India. So framework of green debt securities and business responsibility sustainability report is something, steps which are taken by the Security Exchange Board of India. Then from the RBI side, we have seen that RBI is participating in network of greening financial system, NGFS, which is just a network of central banks across the world, and they share the best practices of how to include the green policy within their policy framework. Then second one is sovereign green bond, which the RBI has recently released on behalf of the government. And a third is a framework for green deposit, that is also released by the RBI. So both the SEBI and the RBI as a government institution are taking steps so as to increase the access of green finance to the people, to the country. So this is something which is discussed within the climate resilience. Now, if you see the budgetary provision, I told you that all the kind of announcements which are there even in this interim budget, they are somewhere in convergence to this kind of themes only. So you'll not find any kind of provision which is very much away or very much divergent from this kind of discussion we had. So this was a discussion with respect to the Indian Economy, a review, a document which is presented by the Department of Economic Affairs. It is much more in a way like economic survey only, but it is much of a shorter version, but looking at the Indian economy and the Indian economic history from a broader lens. So we are done with this document. Now what we will do tomorrow at the same time, the same platform, we'll discuss the budget. We'll discuss what are the macroeconomic indicators that are presented in the budget, which are important from the examination perspective. So that kind of discussion we had tomorrow. Till then, goodbye, take care.